Order. I now call the Standing Committee on Public Accounts to order. My name is Kelly Regan. I'm the MLA for Bedford Basin and the chair of the committee. A reminder to all of our folks here today to place their phones on silent. And I'll ask the committee members to introduce themselves, beginning with Mr. Young.
Good morning, everyone. Happy New Year. Nolan Young, MLA for Shelburne.
Mr. Taggart.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Taggart, MLA for Colchester North.
Ms. Sheehy-Richard.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome. I'm Melissa Sheehy-Richard, the MLA for Hants West.
Ms. LeBlanc.
Good morning, Susan LeBlanc, MLA for Dartmouth North.
Mr. Burrell.
Hi, Gary Burrell, Halifax, Chebucto.
Mr. Clark.
Good morning, everybody. Braden Clark, MLA for Bedford South.
And Mr. Smith.
Good morning, folks. I am Kent Smith. I'm the MLA for the Eastern Shore.
On today's agenda, we have officials with us from the Department of Natural Resources and Renewables with respect to their accountability report and management of Crown lands. So I will ask the witnesses to introduce themselves. I'm going to go left to right. Mr. O'Brien.
Good morning, Mike O'Brien, Executive Director of Finance and Treasury Board.
Mr. Parker.
Good morning, Matt Parker, Executive Director of Forestry and Wildlife.
Deputy Gatien.
Good morning, I'm Karen Gatien, Deputy Minister.
Mr. Geddes.
Good morning, Peter Geddes. I'm the Executive Director of Regional Services.
And Ms. Hickman.
Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to be here this morning. I'm Executive Director of Land Services, Leslie Hickman.
And I invite Deputy Gatien to make her opening remarks.
Thank you, and good morning again. First of all, I'd like to start by thanking you for the opportunity to speak with you about the many important initiatives that we're advancing at the Department of Natural Resources and Renewables. Ultimately, our department is moving Nova Scotia toward a clean and renewable energy future and protecting and managing the province's natural resources in a sustainable way. When you look at the items in our mandate letter, which are also outlined in our last accountability report, you can see quite easily how they all align with this overarching description of our work. Naturally, we are at various stages of the work, but I'm happy to say that we're making progress on all fronts. A transformative piece of this work is implementing recommendations from the Forest Practices Review and adopting the triad model of ecological forestry on Crown land. This model divides Crown land into 3 zones that work together to balance diverse interests, and it prioritizes biodiversity. We're close to having this model fully in place, and we're committed to having at least 20% of Nova Scotia's total land and water mass protected by 2030. We work closely on this goal with our colleagues at Environment and Climate Change and the Mi'kmaq on Indigenous protected and conserved areas. Our provincial parks also play a role in reaching this goal, and they are a great opportunity for Nova Scotians to get outside and enjoy the physical and mental health benefits of being in nature. They're also an important part of our tourism industry and the economy. Parks are one of our best examples of how we're taking action on the mandate direction for government to be inclusive and respectful of all demographic, cultural, and ethnic diversities. We've made accessibility upgrades and built gender-neutral washrooms at some parks, beaches, and campgrounds, and we'll continue this kind of work over time. Nova Scotia's parks and protected areas helps conserve wildlife habitat. Last spring, we amended the Wildlife Act to address the growing problems that are stemming from feeding wildlife. Soon, we'll start consultation on regulations to help us manage and reduce these instances of human-wildlife conflict. Our parks also help maintain essential ecosystems that can increase resilience against climate change. And that leads me to share some highlights of the work we're doing to fight climate change. A key commitment for us is to have 80% of our electricity supplied by renewable energy by 2030. We're exploring all options to meet this goal while ensuring affordability for ratepayers. Some options include wind, solar, tidal, residuals from sustainably harvested wood, and the Maritime Link. We're also exploring the Atlantic Loop, which will require federal support to move forward. As we green our grid, it's making more and more sense to also advance electric transportation. We're working with federal partners to help Nova Scotians make the switch to EVs through incentives and education. We're investing $2.5 million this fiscal in charging infrastructure. We've also been investing millions in programs to help Nova Scotians improve energy efficiency in their homes, businesses, and communities. We're continuing them and increasing support significantly for low and middle income households with the $140 million we announced in December. This money will also leverage millions more from the federal government. These programs reduce greenhouse gas emissions and help Nova Scotians keep more of their money. We know our energy transformation will take time. While there are some actions that can and must be taken in the near future, there are more that we need to do to reach our goal of net zero by 2050. Green hydrogen and offshore wind are key areas to help us get there. That's why we aim to offer leases for 5 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030. All of this work not only helps fight climate change, but also helps grow our green economy here in Nova Scotia. Our thriving solar industry is creating jobs across the province, particularly in rural communities, and our green hydrogen industry is on the verge of becoming a key player in the global export market. We're working on a strategy to responsibly mine critical minerals needed for climate change technologies and keep the economic benefit of that value chain in Nova Scotia. These are just a few examples of how our environment and our economy go hand in hand. As we advance this work, we're committed to protecting ratepayers as best we can and ensuring they have access to clean, reliable, and affordable electricity. And we're continuing to look at options to help keep life affordable to Nova Scotians. Much of the work we do involves the use of our Crown lands. I know people tend to think of Crown land as all land owned by government. Technically, Crown lands are those that we manage under the Crown Lands Act, and they make up about 26% of the province. About 9% of Nova Scotia is managed by Environment and Climate Change under the legislation for protected areas, and our department helps support their work to designate new areas. This only adds up to 35%, so you can see that the vast majority of our land in Nova Scotia is actually private. Government works very hard to balance all the competing interests for this publicly owned land. Within our department, we have biologists, foresters, geologists, and other experts. They work through a formal process to consider a wide range of social, environmental, and economic benefits associated with the use of publicly owned land, both today and in the future. These lands belong to all of us, and ensuring Nova Scotians get the optimum benefit from them is always our goal as we manage them. We're a sizable department with a broad mandate, so I can't possibly address everything in my opening remarks. I'm going to leave it there, but we will certainly do our best to answer your questions as fulsomely as we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Gatien, and I will just pause here and let Mr. McDonald introduce himself.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Apologize for being late. This happened for Christmas break. I'm John A. McDonald, the MLA for Hants East. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McDonald. I would note that officials from the Auditor General's Office, the Legislative Council Office, Hansard, and Legislative Committee's Office are in attendance today at the meeting as well. So this is the point where we open the floor for questions. We'll do 20 minutes with each caucus, and just so our witnesses know, if the 20 minutes lapses while you're in the middle of full flight of rhetoric, I will cut you off. I'm not being rude. I'm just trying to be fair to each of the caucuses that they get their full 20 minutes. So with that, it is now 9:09, and we will begin with the Liberal caucus. Mr. Clark.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you all again for being here. Some familiar faces here. You know, I spent some time in the department working for a former minister, so I know it's a wonderful department that does a lot of really important work. Not just buttering you up, I really do. I really do believe that. So I thank you all for that and for being here today. I wanted to touch on something that I think is maybe a bit underappreciated. And Deputy, you did mention it in your opening remarks, and that's around critical minerals, actually. So, you know, we all love our cell phones, and we all, you know, we want to see everybody driving electric vehicles in 5, 10, 15 years, and we want to transition to you know, a net zero economy, provincially and globally, of course. But to do that will require extensive use of a very old technology, which is mining, of course. So, and we know we have critical minerals here in Nova Scotia that we could be, I believe, taking advantage of and really accessing them, because we know that the world needs them, so they're going to get mined somewhere, and it might be in a place that doesn't have the the safety or environmental regulations that we would have here in Nova Scotia. So other provinces, Ontario, Quebec, and others, Alberta, have released strategies on critical minerals and how they're going to access and use that resource in their provinces. You mentioned that briefly in your opening remarks, Deputy. So could you maybe just elaborate on where that process is within the department, and if it's something that is actively being developed, and will we see in the short to medium term critical minerals being mined here in Nova Scotia?
Deputy Gatien.
Thank you for your question. So the short answer is yes, we are looking at what the possibilities are for Nova Scotia. So where we're at right now, as you may or may not be aware, the federal government announced a critical mineral strategy as well, and some funding aligned with that. So our geoscience and mines team is looking hard at kind of what are the opportunities there, and then doing an assessment in terms of the critical minerals that are available in Nova Scotia, and developing a way forward, a possible strategy, having some consultation, conversations really at this point, working with the feds to see what are the opportunities in terms of leveraging federal funding to help support our work as well. And we're hoping to be able to present some options to government, likely through the winter, possibly early spring. So it's pretty close. Now it'll be government's decision whether or not that's the way forward. But we felt it was important for us to look at it and see, is there a way that we can, this is a Karen word, I'm going to modernize, use the word modernize. I don't know that the geologists in the department would necessarily agree with me. But are there ways that if we can move forward to have sustainable, environmentally, sensitive mining, green mining? There are jurisdictions that do green mining as well. What are the options in terms of that, and really leveraging critical minerals? Because as you say, we want to also keep the supply chain, the benefits of the supply chain here in Nova Scotia, and do it safely, and not just for workers but also for the environment. So should be through the winter, early spring.
Mr. Clark.
Thank you for that. And you touched on another piece that I wanted to ask about, which is kind of an assessment of what we have and where it is, which is always, the most important thing when you're talking about mining. What do we have and where is it? Prospectors are out there, I'm sure. But does the department have funding, or will they access funding through the feds, for example, to really do a province-wide assessment so that the department knows and everybody really knows, in terms of critical minerals, this is what we have, this is where it is, so we can obviously plan appropriately for what we might want to see in the future? Is that going to happen?
Deputy Gatien.
So yes. Now whether we need federal funding to do that or not remains to be seen. But certainly, I think the team already has a good sense of where minerals are, critical minerals are available. But they would do further. That's part of it. Further research, further exploration. What are the opportunities, and what might that look like? And there may be some that, because of the way they're mined, we might decide that's not really something that's viable for Nova Scotia. We have significant population density in the province, so there's some types of mining that are maybe more challenging than others. But we'll look at all of that through that process.
Mr. Clark.
Thank you. And going through the accountability report, another thing that was mentioned was the issue of strengthening confidence in the mining sector. And that could mean for the public, that could mean for the industry, that could mean for government, that means for everybody who's involved in the mining industry or who has an interest or a stake in it. So when we, as a caucus, we speak to representatives from the mining industry, and there's a sense that the confidence level is not there at the moment. We've had one operational mine, a gold mine in Nova Scotia, for the last few years. Beyond that, of course, it's always a sensitive and difficult issue when you're dealing with a natural resource project of really any kind. Mining in particular, I would say, given some of the historical facts and mistakes that have been made in this province and elsewhere. So Deputy, how would you assess kind of the confidence that the industry should have in the future of mining in Nova Scotia? Is it something that we should be optimistic about, or is it something that remains to be seen, and we might kind of be putting the brakes on it a little bit, perhaps?
Deputy Gatien?
At this point, I would say they should be optimistic. I think that's part of, it doesn't mean it won't look a bit different. Critical minerals is a great example, where we're looking at opportunities of, are there ways to mine waste for value, so old sites that, where there's tailings and still have, the critical minerals are within the tailings. They just didn't know they needed them back then. So, we're looking at green mining, as I mentioned, all of the opportunities. So it's not, and we're talking with the sector to say, what is it you'd like to hear and know and understand from us as well, and what do we need to hear and know from you? So we're hoping that they'll feel optimistic that Nova Scotia is open for business, but that it will have to be sustainable mining, and that there'll be a rigorous environmental process that they'll have to undertake. I don't think that's a surprise to anyone, but that we are interested in seeing the future of mining for Nova Scotia for sure.
Mr. Clark?
Also curious about the issue of abandoned mines. So my colleague to my left here from Eastern Shore, there's some historical mines in his neck of the woods and all over this province, where, as I mentioned earlier, 100 years ago, we had really no understanding or interest in some cases in protecting the environment when it came to mining operations. And I understand there is a liability associated with that for the province. So I'm just wondering, does the department have a sense of what that liability looks like province-wide? Has that assessment been done? Or is it kind of, we know maybe one or two when there's really, dozens of sites that could fall into that category?
Deputy Gatien?
Thank you. So I live in Dartmouth, very close to Montague, so it's very, very familiar to me as well. I'll start, and then I think I will, Peter is our lead on this work. So we know, we have a list. There was a list of 69, and we've got it down to 60 in terms of, they're doing assessments as they go, kind of, okay, there's no risk there, so we're down to 60. There are two, as you would know, Montague, and I can't remember the name one, but I know I have it in my head. It's just blanked, where we're doing some in-depth work. And then there's 5 more that we just put forward to do some further assessments. And the work continues. It's pretty complex, but you're right. We're taking it seriously. We're trying to figure out, okay, where do we need to focus first? What are the most likely high risk? And then kind of I don't want to use the term desktop assessment, but it's kind of how I have it in my head, sort of a first assessment, and then we'll dig deeper. Peter, do you want to more clearly maybe explain that?
Mr. Geddes?
Sure. So I guess on the question of the liability, there's $118 million that's booked for the Department for Liability for abandoned mine sites right now. That's broken down into the 2 sites that are most advanced that we've done a fair bit of work on. One is Montague, as the deputy mentioned. The other one is Goldenville, which is in Guysborough County. Beyond that, there were several more that we did environmental site assessments on last year, where we were able to book some numbers for liability as well, too. 6 additional sites there. And then the other thing we've done is we've booked some funds to essentially do assessments for the remaining sites. So that's what makes up the bulk of that $115 million. So we know we're going to have to work through assessments for a whole lot of these sites. The good news is we're kind of working the list of sites from both ends. There's some that from a desktop review and just digging into old files, we can start to determine there really was no activity on this site that would have likely resulted in contaminations of concern that we would have to do remediation. So we've been able to start to drop them off the site, off the list, without doing any real significant work. But at the same time, on the other end of the spectrum, there's ones that we know for sure have contamination based on the type of activity that occurred there. They'll need detailed assessments, and at some point in time, they'll need strategies which will include either management of the site as is or potentially remediation of the site. So right now, the total booked liability is around $115 million for that package.
Mr. Clark, you have just under 10 minutes left.
That's great. Thank you, Madam Chair. And Mr. Geddes, perhaps, so $115 million or so from sites. Is there any desktop, perhaps, or any estimate of what the total liability looks like? It must be hundreds of millions of dollars, I assume, because we're already past $100 million. But is there any idea of what that liability overall looks like, or do we just not know at this point?
Mr. Geddes?
No, we don't have an overall number. That is one of the things that the Auditor General actually asked us, was whether or not we could use some of the early sites, the Goldenville and Montague, where we had some assessments of remediation costs, and do a projection across all the remaining sites. It's way too complicated for that, unfortunately, and there are different types of mine sites as well too, which pose different types of risks and issues. But the number will go up, I can assure you of that, but I don't think we could even give an order of magnitude with confidence at this point in time.
Mr. Clark?
Thank you, and I appreciate that. You know, very few of them are similar in those ways, and as you say, there's different levels of contaminations and issues, and the local geology and environment has an impact on that as well. So I appreciate that. And I hope that, you know, in the future as we move forward, that number gets refined further and further, because it's really important, you know, from not just a financial lens, of course, but an environmental and social justice point of view as well. So I just wanted to ask as well, on a slightly different topic around renewables. So we all know that the target is 80% renewable by 2030. And obviously, I don't need to remind anybody that there's been a lot of maybe hurt feelings and strong feelings around power rates and so on, and bond ratings, and the future of some of these projects as it relates to Nova Scotia Power and legislation that the government has passed on this issue. So I'm wondering, is the 80% renewable target by 2030, is that achievable without the Atlantic Loop project?
Deputy Gatien.
At this point, we believe it can be. So just to run through, we're at 30% now, right? So we just completed a request for proposals for wind. That's about another 12% with those 5 projects. And then we have solar's about 2%. When the Maritime Link fully flows, that's another roughly 10%. And then there's another market access block that we can purchase from the Maritime Link once they get their software issues fixed. That's about another 10%. So that's like 20% from the link itself. And then we're hoping to do perhaps present to government the idea of another call for proposals, but for sort of the larger industrials. We call it Green Choice. There's the legislation that was passed last spring kind of enabled that opportunity, and so that could be another 10 to 12%. So we're getting closer. Now, full disclosure, we need a firm backstop for that. So that might mean that 20% has to be converted to natural gas. We would need batteries. We're also looking at how can we put some batteries, large-scale batteries, on the system to provide firm capacity when the wind's not blowing, or you need something to backstop that. So we're looking at all options, and it doesn't mean that the loop wouldn't still have other benefits, but it does, as I said in my opening remarks, it needs federal funding, but there might be the opportunity there to, for us to be able to when the offshore wind down the road takes off, is there a way for us to be able to supply wind energy to other jurisdictions as well?
Mr.
Back.
Mr. Clark?
Thank you. Obviously, as it relates to Bill 112, back in the fall when that was introduced and passed in the legislature, executives from Nova Scotia Power were pretty quick to say, as a result of this, we can't move forward on significant projects, including the Atlantic Loop, and we're basically not going to be able to do much on the capital side, and our debt, our bond rating is taking a hit, and this will cost ratepayers more down the line. And I think we've seen that come to pass since that legislation was passed. So was that something that was anticipated at the time, or was that a bit of a surprise that pretty quickly they said, look, we're out on loop, which, I mean, I think we can all agree is a critical piece of the goal of getting to 80%. Was that foreseeable?
Deputy Gatien?
Just so I'm clear, so your question is, was it foreseeable that they would say they're pausing their infrastructure? I wasn't aware of it until they said it. It was a surprise. I'm not surprised. they weren't happy and they had negative comments, of course. That wasn't a surprise. That particular decision, though, was not known to us until they said it.
Mr. Clark, 4 minutes.
4 minutes, thank you. So I guess sometimes I think we can try to do things in short-term cycles and we don't think about the long-term consequences of this. And I think this is one prime example of an issue where power rates will still go up. And we're seeing some serious blowback and serious consequences of that. And I understand that I'm not directing that commentary at you necessarily. I just think it's the state of play, unfortunately. But I wonder, when we've talked about green hydrogen, you talked about that, and look, I don't think any of us on opposition or government side would want to see anything fail that could be a great project by any means. But is that realistic or feasible to have significant scale of that type of project online by 2030 for green hydrogen?
Deputy Gatien.
Yes, I believe it is. Yeah, the proponents, particularly the two proponents that are moving forward right now, are pretty ambitious, and they're moving as quickly as possible, and they have. I mean, remember, green hydrogen, a lot of that will be for export, right? It won't necessarily. We're certainly, if there's a benefit to Nova Scotia, we'll take it. But a lot of the value of that is also the jobs and what the money does to the local economy, for the local economy as well. But yes, there's certainly all indications at this point are that there would at least be some development ready by 2030.
Mr. Clark, 2 minutes.
Thank you. But just so I understand correctly, those projects, at least at this point, what's produced from them would likely be destined for export in a majority of a sense, like to Europe, for example?
Deputy Gatien.
I think it's too early to say for sure. I'm quite confident that if Nova Scotia Power wanted to purchase some, they could purchase some as well as they do any other fuel, right? It's such a quantity that they're planning to produce. It wouldn't actually be possible for Nova Scotia probably to use all of the green hydrogen that they're estimating will be produced, and never mind the offshore wind down the road, right? The export's what makes it cost effective to be produced here.
Mr. Clark.
And so I guess if I could summarize sort of where we've gone on this, assuming 80% renewables by 2030 with the Atlantic Loop seemed very feasible, very, I don't want to say likely because we're talking huge projects, but we had good reason to be very optimistic that we could achieve that. Without that, I would describe it as significantly more difficult. How would you rate the probability of getting to 80% without the loop at all? Are we talking a 50-50? Do you have any idea how you could quantify that?
Deputy Gatien.
I wouldn't have a percentage. I will say that we're working to get to 2030 for 80% renewables. It might be more of a combination of things, perhaps, than, Atlantic Loop might have been X percentage versus we might need 2 or 3 different types of renewable resources to make that same percentage up. But, that's our target. That's what we're aiming for.
Mr. Clark?
And the intention then, I assume, and the goal and your expectation, I assume as well, is that the remaining coal-fired plants in Nova Scotia would be closed by 2030 as is the goal?
Deputy Gatien.
As it stands right now, yes. Yeah.
Time has now elapsed, and we will move on to the NDP for questioning. Ms. LeBlanc.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I just want to keep on this for a minute, but before I get back into the Atlantic Loop question, I just want to talk about green hydrogen for a minute. I want to know, Deputy, what is your understanding of why there, in the legislation for the green hydrogen, there is no reference to green?
Deputy Gatien.
It's because there might be a transition, so there might be the opportunity as well for, there's like a whole range of colors, like a blue hydrogen, a mix. So there's that other 20%. We might be able to mix hydrogen with natural gas to use it as well. So if you just use the green hydrogen, it would just limit it. Yeah.
Ms. LeBlanc.
Yeah, well, yes, and also it opens the door to an investment, a huge investment in energy production that's not green, right? So you can see why that's a concern and why we would have introduced amendments into the legislation because of that, because this is exactly what we're talking about. We have these very ambitious and important goals to get to 80% of renewables by 2030, and we don't see the government in the work that's happening, at least on the surface, we don't see a step-by-step plan to get there. So if there is an acknowledgement that some of that will be a blue energy or a blue hydrogen before we get to the green, it would be great to see that laid out. This is the first time I have heard someone from the government say that out loud. So that's significant. But getting back to the Atlantic Loop and he's gone. The other questions around that. So I hear you're saying, the Atlantic Loop would be, if that was happening, then that would be a significant step towards 80% renewables. If it doesn't happen, then we've got these other options, which is like, very welcome to hear, obviously. But what I don't see, and what was my criticism at the time of the climate plan being released, is that we don't see a step-by-step, year-by-year analysis of how we're getting there. So we have this great goal of 2030. It's 2023 now. And so that means we have 7 years. So is the department planning on releasing any kind of, year-by-year, check this box, but at the end of this has to be done, so we can get to those targets? That's my first question, or my second question, I guess.
Deputy Gatien.
At this point, no, but I'll certainly take that back and see if there's something that, within our accountability report that we could sort of provide some form of updates on how that's moving forward. And just to be clear, we're moving to green hydrogen. Like that's all that's going to sell in Europe anyway, right? So it's just that the term hydrogen keeps it broader as we move to the transition to green.
Ms. LeBlanc.
Thank you. So again, echoing what my colleague from the Liberals was saying, the Atlantic Loop is the hope and dream, I guess. But when we passed the legislation around the rate cap, Nova Scotia Power did threaten to, divest in the loop. So how can Nova Scotians be sure that we're going to get the Atlantic Loop if we don't have the utility on board? Or are we sure? And if we're not sure, then are we just letting it go? Or are we going to Plan B, or are we still pursuing Plan A?
Deputy Gatien.
We're looking at all options to get to that 80% renewable energy, and we were with or without the loop. We're looking, at all options, because we also have that 2050 net zero goal. So that won't, we won't take our feet off the gas on that. In terms of the loop, we continue to have conversations. I, as recently as yesterday, met with a couple of colleagues with the federal government to talk about it. But as the last meeting, there's a Atlantic, I can never get titles right, roundtable kind of meeting with Quebec and New Brunswick and Nova Scotia on loop discussions. And Nova Scotia Power was at the table as well. So we continue to talk about it and see what's possible to move forward as they figure out kind of what the state of play is for them as well. There is no loop without federal support. It's just too costly, and the price hasn't gone down, as you can appreciate, with fuel costs rising and infrastructure and steel and like wood. Everything has gone up. So the price continues to escalate in terms of building it. And, if we continue to have those conversations with the federal government, but that will be a significant part, both Nova Scotia Power and the feds.
Ms. LeBlanc.
Yeah, so I was going to say, two-parter. So there's no Atlantic Loop without the federal government, but is there Atlantic Loop without Nova Scotia Power? That's my first question. And second question is there a date by which you say, all right, we've got to scrap it, we've got to move to Plan B because now we're running out of time?
Deputy Gatien?
I can't imagine, to be honest, can't imagine a loop without Nova Scotia Power. I don't know how that would work. Doesn't mean there wouldn't be some other way that I haven't thought of or can't think of at this point. We don't have a set date, cutoff date at this point at all. We're hoping to continue to have the conversations, but I would say probably sooner rather than later there'll have to be a decision. The federal government is going to want to know, are we investing this or not? And there are two other governments that will also have to decide and two other utilities that will have to decide if they're also interested in continuing.
Ms. LeBlanc?
Okay, great. Thank you. So right now, again, and I'll go back to this, to sort of the climate plan and the climate risk assessment. It's really tricky to see right now whether we're on track to meet our energy targets. Like we know there's lots of good things happening, and we know we're leaders in efficiency and all that stuff, although we have some work to do there too. But we've seen the scramble year after year when we don't meet a particular target. So again, I just want to go back to this sort of year-by-year plan. So my request is, or my question is, will the government release a year-to-year plan that explains, on the path to 80% renewable energy and the phase-out of coal, what proportion of energy will come from what source each year? So that would be the other part of that. Can you commit to that today?
Deputy Gatien?
I can commit to taking it back. I will take it back and propose it. And I think you've said it before anyway. This doesn't seem new to me, right? I'm not being cute. I think you actually asked for that before, in the House, maybe. But we'll certainly look at how we can better communicate to the public kind of where we're at. I'll take your point.
Ms. LeBlanc?
Great, and I'll follow up in estimates. That'll be the next time we talk, probably. So one of the features of the framework with Nova Scotia Power is that they're guaranteed a band of profit from their operations. Other jurisdictions are implementing frameworks where returns are tied to performance, and we've definitely talked about this in the House, known as performance-based regulation. Are there discussions at the department about this idea, about requiring that type of regulation for Nova Scotia Power? And, is the government exploring this? We've talked about it a lot. When all of the stuff has been going down with Nova Scotia Power, this has been a suggestion, and just want to know if it's being heard at the department.
Deputy Gatien?
Absolutely. And in fact, there was a performance standard just passed. I'm trying to think. It was for large industrials mostly, and there's also one that will direct the UARB to use like smart meters to assess kind of, are there patterns of outages in certain areas, certain residential customers, certain commercial customers, and direct the NSP to make course corrections and the possibility of penalties. So we're looking at what other performance standards might be needed as well. And you may remember in the spring of 22, we kind of set the stage for the performance standards and moving forward. So we continue to have those discussions on what would be appropriate and what that might look like and how that might work.
Ms. LeBlanc, I saw you looking at your watch. You have just over 10 minutes left.
Yeah, great. Well, speaking of penalties, in 2019, Nova Scotia Power failed to meet its legislated targets, and therefore the company was, I think, levied a financial penalty of around $165 million. Of course, that would be paid, passed on to the ratepayers, and so that penalty was forgiven, which is great news for the ratepayers, but expensive for the government, and also doesn't hold the company to account. So if we're looking at penalties, or like if we're looking at a performance-based regulation, I don't know that penalties is the way to go. Like, we need to be to be able to affect the company so that actually it matters that they're not doing what they are legislated to do. And so, that would be tied to their portion of profits, as opposed to like levying a fine that then we're like, okay, well, forget about that fine, because it's too expensive for everybody. So my question about that particular case, the $165 million, were there terms to the agreement, and what if there were terms to the agreement of that forgivable penalty, or the forgiveness of that penalty? What were those terms? Is there a way to ensure that when Nova Scotia Power doesn't meet targets or performance standards, that there is a real consequence?
Deputy Gatien?
I actually don't know that situation. I wasn't with the department then, but happy to get someone to prepare you a response. So I can certainly take that back.
Great. Oh.
Yeah, the 165 million. I mean, I heard of it the same as everyone else, but I wasn't. The 2019 penalty.
Ms. LeBlanc?
Yeah.
Ms. LeBlanc?
Yeah, but my understanding is that the penalty was from 2019, but the 165 million was forgiven in 2022. It was so you were with the department then, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Deputy Gatien?
What I'm saying is I don't have the details of the circumstances. That
Ms. LeBlanc?
Great. I just want to go back to efficiency for a second. So, we know, and everyone knows, that the cheapest, most effective type of energy is efficiency, right? Like this is not in debate. And so the great program that was announced about the heat pumps is really important for lots of Nova Scotians. I talk about heat pumps all the time, as you probably know. But I'm wondering, for that program, what percentage of that program is being funded by the federal government and what percentage is by the provincial government?
Deputy Gatien?
Sorry.
You've done so well.
I know. I knew I'd blow it eventually. So right now, it's 100. We're still in negotiations with the federal government. They'd indicated a pot of about 60.5 million, and we put in over, I think it's 4 years, and our portion is 140 million. So at this point, for the low income, it would be free heat pumps, and then for middle income, it's a continuum of the subsidy, and also efficiency work for both.
Yeah. Ms. LeBlanc?
Madam Chair, may I ask that we get like a sort of a statement with all that written down, so that that would be great for the committee to get that at some point. That would be great. And then the other question I kind of wanted to ask when it comes to efficiency is, like, as we go towards 2030 and we're building new buildings and we're talking about like residential buildings, which we know are, we have like a massive amount of residential development happening, but we also have other types of buildings being built. Is the government or the department considering like actually requiring any new build from here on in to be built so that we don't have any more furnaces and that we only have heat pumps or other types of renewable energy for heating sources, like adopting building codes that actually require us to stop using fossil fuels?
Deputy Gatien?
So as part of our work with the climate plan, so we partnered quite a bit with environment and climate change on that plan. We're looking at banning the installations of oil-fired equipment in new buildings by 2025, adopting the 2020 National Energy Code for buildings and the 2020 National Building Code. We're looking at supporting construction of net zero building and multi-residential buildings, including net zero affordable housing, which will be really important. And we're requiring that any and all new government buildings have major retrofits and enter planning after 2020 to be net zero energy ready and climate resilient. And there's also the launching of that Green Choice program that I mentioned, for the larger industrials or maybe larger residents like universities to develop their own possible wind projects for renewable energy.
Ms. LeBlanc?
So I'm hearing that there are right now residential, projects happening, like single-family home projects happening, where they're putting in natural gas lines. So how do you square that circle? Like, if those houses are not built yet, why would they be built to bring in natural gas when we know that natural gas is not a renewable energy? You mentioned natural gas earlier, that maybe there's a chunk that has to be natural gas for a while. It's cleaner than oil, but not that much cleaner, and it's not renewable. It does produce greenhouse gas. So can you square that circle? Should we not be taking like making a significant change so that we are like leading and we are just saying no to greenhouse gases?
Just over 4 minutes. Deputy Gatien.
At this time, the direction is oil-fired furnace, but certainly I would anticipate as we get closer to that 2024 date, we'd probably be looking at all other sources as well, and to see what's the possibility of conversion to. So, I mean, it's a good question that I'll take back, right? So if you have a natural gas fueling your furnace, is there an opportunity down the road as we develop hydrogen and ammonia products that it could be converted? But yeah.
Ms. LeBlanc? Mr. Burrell?
Thank you. I was wanting to ask a question about parks. I'm thinking particularly about the situation with Mabou Provincial Park. Could you tell us, has there been from Cabot Links any overture or hint of an overture or draft proposal or anything along those lines to the department and the government about the proposal they are floating at the level of the community about a golf course at Cabot Links?
Deputy Gatien, just under 3 minutes.
No overtures at all to me in the department, and I'm going to look at my colleagues. As of late yesterday, we did not receive a proposal. We haven't received one today, as far as anyone knows.
Correct.
Yeah, so no proposal at all. We check every day.
Mr. Burrell?
Well, it's an odd situation that people in Inverness County are in, that the government has not been put in a position of having to exercise any responsibility in the absence of a proposal, and yet the proposal is on the community's table, causing lots of concern and a considerable amount of division in the community. In this situation, where there is a de facto proposal, but not a formal proposal, there's a community proposal, but not a government proposal, would it not be helpful or fitting for the department or the government to offer some sense of the parameters in which such a proposal would be received by the department? Would that not help in the present turmoil that's taking place in Mabou?
Deputy Gatien.
While I understand the question and the suggestion, it actually wouldn't be appropriate for us to. We haven't seen the proposal. It's not been presented to us. We would have to treat it as we would any other proposal to the department, and then make a decision. So at this point, it would be, I actually don't know what they're asking for. I haven't seen it.
Mr. Burrell?
Well, as you know, there have been lots of community meetings about it, so it's not as though nothing exists. Something has been put forward, just not through formal channels to the department. So if anything at all were to come to the department about this kind of proposal, is the department and is the government committed to an open and transparent public consultation before a response or decision to that proposal was made?
Deputy Gatien?
I know we don't have much time. If the proposal were to come in, it would go through the regular process, and an application for access to Crown lands involves. Normally I would turn it to my colleagues, but it has to go through consultation, not just Mi'kmaq community consultation as well. So, if it went through the process, it would have all of that at that time.
Mr. Burrell?
I may have answered too quickly.
Ms. Gatien, Deputy Gatien.
Sorry. You're good. Okay. Yeah, it would be treated like every other application for Crown lands.
Order. Time for NDP questioning has elapsed. We'll now move on to the PC caucus. So you have until 10:09. Mr. Young.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to get back to green hydrogen. It seems like a year ago nobody was talking about green hydrogen. It's in the news. It's everywhere now. Can you expand a bit on the Nova Scotia's potential for this sector? How will developing it help us meet our climate change goals?
Deputy Gatien.
Sure, thank you. Yes, I was at a session last summer, and I said I haven't talked about hydrogen as much since university chemistry. So in terms of meeting our climate goals, so I think it's a real opportunity. It's a produced by renewable energy. We have a great wind regime in Nova Scotia, onshore and offshore. So it will be, a fairly straightforward over time way of producing energy to produce this molecule, these electrons of green hydrogen, which then can also be transitioned into ammonia, which is what will be easiest and in the safest way shipped overseas. So there's a real market for it around the world, as every jurisdiction is trying to get off fossil fuels, including our own. We have high environmental standards in Nova Scotia. We have, a really strong workforce. We have, I already mentioned the wind regime and safety standards for our employees. And so, and we have people coming and knocking in areas that, let's face it, have had challenges in terms of economic development. So it's also an opportunity for rural communities. It's not something that you necessarily are going to be able to produce in downtown Halifax. So it's kind of a great opportunity that can be shared across the province. And we will also hopefully be able to access it for our own fuel costs in Nova Scotia. I know that our proponents have also had discussions with Nova Scotia Power around opportunities to make sure that they're aware of what's coming.
Mr. Young.
Can you discuss can you discuss the different sources of renewable energy that your department may be working on? So, is there multiple sources of different renewable energies you could expand that your work is underway on?
Deputy Gatien.
Sure. As I've mentioned, we had a wind procurement project. We, really had great response to it. There are 5 proponents that are now will have to go through the fulsome environmental assessment process and community consultations and Mi'kmaq consultations. But, we're very optimistic that will provide that 12% that I talked about, over 350 megawatts of power. I think it's now up to about 372, but 370. So as we progress through that, we continue the work on tidal. Tidal's much more, in many ways, it's much more complex, but we're continuing to work through that. We also, our solar community is thriving. I mean, it's a great news. That is a great news story in terms of jobs in across the province as well. I think it's about 2,500 jobs, and it continues to grow. It represents about 8% of the renewable, but as I mentioned when I answered one of the first questions, it's going to take every possible option, and we continue to have discussions on the possibilities for offshore wind, which is quite exciting. Just as a reminder, or for those who aren't aware, there's a joint management structure with the federal government for the offshore, similar to what it would have been for natural gas. And so we're working with them and working to launch a regional assessment with the Impact Association of Canada, I think they're called, and that will really be a broad consultation around the opportunities with offshore wind.
Mr. Young.
Ms. Gatien, when you had your opening remarks, you talked a little bit about a critical mineral strategy. Are you able to expand a little bit on that, or?
Sure. Deputy Gatien.
So as I mentioned earlier, we're looking through, the federal government made an announcement of their strategy, as have other provinces, which was mentioned. But we're looking to see what, with this list of critical minerals that the federal government have identified, do we agree, and what are the opportunities in Nova Scotia for some critical minerals? So just to give you a concrete example, a lot of the green technology will require critical minerals, as do phones and computers and other things. And so there are jurisdictions in the world that, but we have cobalt mined in the Congo, which perhaps has different environmental and safety standards for its employees, but we use it and we'll have to use it for green tech, right? And so how do we know that it's safe, environmentally safe, and that the employees are safe? And then how do we help support the economy of Nova Scotia by being able to access the benefits of that supply chain that will result. So we're looking at what are the opportunities in Nova Scotia for critical minerals? What do they include? How do we educate the public around it? And you know, once we land on, okay, these are the critical minerals, this is the type of mining that we would support for them, and then how do we start to socialize that with people so they understand what it is and what it isn't? Yeah.
Mr. Young.
Advancing energy efficiency was also part of your department's mandate. And I'm just wondering, what actions are we taking through energy efficiency, both to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and lower energy costs for families and businesses?
Deputy Gatien.
So this is a longstanding program, and we continue to grow it and support it. You know, we've done energy efficiency programming in I think at this point we're about 1,200 First Nations homes, but in the end, all of the homes in the 13 communities will have efficiency assessments done and work done. We recently announced the funding for, I'm not supposed to use off oil, but it's moving away from oil. And so what that does is, you know, it's not just a free heat pump for a low-income family. It's also the upgrades to their electrical panel, because in a lot of cases, the existing electrical panel wouldn't be sufficient to be able to operate the panel. And then how do we also at the same time provide some efficiency, you know, assessments around what other changes and improvements to make sure that just putting the heat pump in, and fixing the electrical panel, but if you don't make sure that their windows and insulation is in a good place, the money is still going to, you know, the heat's really still going to pour out. So we're doing all of that work. We're also helping middle-income families, because we know a lot of young families, yes, income, you know, the income level may look good, but they have other expenses. Costs are growing up everywhere. So we also increase the availability of subsidies and support for them as well to continue the efficiency work.
Mr. Young.
Yeah, I have another one. I'm just wondering, I want to get back to green hydrogen again, and I'm wondering if you could tell us about the process that you use to address the multiple requests for Crown land for the green hydrogen development in a way that ensures Nova Scotia is well positioned to seize opportunities and become a global leader.
Deputy Gatien.
So as I mentioned in my opening remarks, there is not a lot of Crown land, right? 26% of Nova Scotia's Crown land. So we had 4 proponents who basically applied for pretty much the same area of land, because that's where the wind regime is probably strongest and they can get up to speed as quickly as possible. So we wanted to support the industry and make sure that Nova Scotia was able to benefit from this significant opportunity, but have as fair a process as possible and address some overlaps that existed in their applications as well. And they were the applicants for the area. There were other applicants nearby for different purposes, and we dealt with those in our normal way. So we decided as a first process, we'd have what we're calling a request for an RFA, a request for applications. So they basically put in here's what we're proposing, here's the land that we're requiring, these are the things that we've done. And then we had a panel that were not involved in any way in the development of the work that we've done for green hydrogen. So there was someone with some legal expertise, legal expertise, economist and energy expertise, and land management science experience, PhD. So they went through the process and the applications and basically were able to, based on what they presented, see who was able to, really move quickly, kind of your first mover advantage, really had done the work that they needed to do, even at a preliminary stage with local community to the community development or community engagement side. They've engaged the Mi'kmaq. They have, some experience and background in doing this kind of work. And what culminated was a process where we will provide an MOU to them. It's not a lease. It's an MOU that basically says, okay, we won't entertain applications for this 2-year period while you go through your environmental assessment, your Mi'kmaq consultation, your testing, things like that. But it's no guarantee at the end of the 2 years, if they haven't followed the processes and been approved, they're going to get a lease. Like, it's not a fast track that way. It was really a way to, as fairly as possible, support the growth of the industry and make sure that everyone had an opportunity to move forward.
Mr. Young.
I'll pass it to my colleague, MLA Sheehy-Richard.
Ms. Sheehy-Richard.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was so engaged in that, I didn't realize I was up next. But I do want to pivot a little bit. When you talk about our goal of being 20% of our land and water being protected by 2030, can you talk a little bit more about some of the steps that you've taken already to get towards that goal?
Deputy Gatien.
So the direction that we were given was that we would, it's in our mandate letter as well, we would address the parks and protected areas, the PAPA plan from 2013, those areas first. So that's what we've been doing. And I will say that we work hand in glove with our colleagues at Environment and Climate Change. It's a shared goal for us to do that. And then by 2023, we also have to complete a plan for, okay, great, we have the 2013, which will get us to approximately 14%, I think. And then what's the plan going forward to get to 20% by 2030? So we have project team conversations happening, but we haven't produced the plan for the 20% yet, but it is due in 2023.
Ms. Sheehy-Richard.
And also, something else that popped up in your opening remarks when you talked about the department being responsible for also our provincial parks system. Can you talk about the success maybe and some of the things that you saw from this past 2022 season and how that went?
Deputy Gatien.
So I will say I'm really proud of the work that the parks, all of the staff, but the parks team have done, and it's been, the growth has continued year over year, and as a camper myself, I think it's just tremendous that so many Nova Scotians are taking advantage of these beautiful parks. So I won't say any more. I will actually let Peter, who is the executive director that leads that area, speak to that piece.
Mr. Geddes.
Yeah, so we continue to have very successful park seasons. It's exceeded, I think, our expectations even. We thought maybe there was an anomaly for a year or two with COVID, but in fact, this past year, not that COVID's gone, but we've still seen the bar going up. We had this year for our camping parks, we have 20 camping parks in the province, we had 99,000 camper nights. So those are campsites that are booked. And if not for Hurricane Fiona, we would have broken 100,000. That's about double what it would have been back in 2011. So major increase in use of our camping parks. We also incidentally know that our day use parks and hiking trails have become much more used, but we use tools called trail counters where we can see count the number of people that come through. We count cars. Our lifeguards make observations about the number of people at our beaches as well too. So it's been a great news story for provincial parks. They've been highly used, and the curve is going this way. It's going up, and the interest continues to be there. So it's great.
Ms. Sheehy-Richard, just over 5 minutes.
That's excellent to hear. I myself enjoy our provincial parks immensely. I like to hike when I have time. I don't find that as often as I do now, but I do plan to go to Uniacke this weekend. So, and also in that work, can you talk a little bit? I remember in another committee I think I was in about the accessibility and inclusion improvements that you're making to some of the parks.
Mr. Geddes.
Sure, that's a piece that we're certainly proud of. We've invested quite a bit of time and resources in the last couple of years. This started, I think, 3 seasons ago. We hired some students to do accessibility audits around our parks and generate some recommendations and ideas for improvements. Since that time, we have made a number of investments in things like, you might have heard of Moby mats. These are beach mats that go out so that people that are in wheelchairs can access beach parks. We've made a number of those investments. We've also made changes to sort of our access in parks as well, too, making the parks more accessible. We've looked at signage. We have also made some pretty significant infrastructure investments in general neutral washrooms, but also accessible washrooms. Really amazing design that's been done there. We're planning more of that this year as well, too. For example, we plan this year to put in a new comfort station at Dollar Lake and also replace the building at Lawrencetown Beach as well, too. I see Mr. Smith smiling at that one. I think it's good news for his there. Yeah. And all those new building designs are designed for an accessibility standard and for gender neutrality. And the other thing is that the new accessibility strategy actually includes, we were proud to see actually one of our parks was on the cover showing a Moby mat in use, which was nice, but it actually includes some specifics about making more campsites accessible as well. We have some campsites that have been made accessible now, but we're going to be creating more campsites that are accessible as well.
Ms. Sheehy-Richard.
Very good.
3.5 minutes.
Okay, and then, like, within the budget, is it very big, allocation? There's so many parks, and some of them are aging parks, and in particular, the investments. I was wondering if any of those investments towards would they be going towards also, like, repairing the aging play equipment that some of them once upon a time had, and each summer you go back and there's less and less equipment. Is there any plans for some of that to be, because that's also a piece of the inclusion, making them family friendly. It would attract, for example, more families to use that particular park.
Mr. Geddes?
Well, it's good news that we're getting a lot more visitors to parks. As you can imagine, it puts demand on the system and demand on the infrastructure. I mean, there's lots of aging infrastructure around the province, and there's issues with playground equipment as one example, but we've got other types of infrastructure in our parks that are important to maintain. And, of course, some of it just gets old and needs to be replaced. But we also have storm events, which we saw this year, which can just wipe out a boardwalk or a set of stairs at the beach, or can, cover trails and trees that require a lot of time. So we maintain a rolling list of park priorities for infrastructure, a 5-year rolling plan of things that we want to move forward with. We do have a TCA allocation every year for $1 million for those types of, for capital type projects. So that would include the new building at Lawrencetown Beach as an example. And so any given time we can say what we want to do next year or the year after. We are always having to respond to some of these unexpected events like Hurricane Fiona, which did do some damage in parks as well, too. And we do have some budget to manage that. But, clearly long-term, as demand and use continues to rise, we'll have to continue to look at ways to invest in parks. And it's a good problem to have, but, it's important to be able to maintain the resources, infrastructure in the parks as well.
Ms. Sheehy-Richard, 1.5 minutes.
Oh, well, I hope that we can look at that. I know with Department of Public Works, there's like a 5-year capital plan that's shared. Is there such a place that one could go look at kind of what is anticipated or shared? Okay.
Mr. Geddes?
Well, it so happens the former director of parks is Matt Parker sitting over here. The 5-year capital, he would know a lot about the 5-year capital plan. I can't remember if that's published or not, so I'll turn it over to him.
Mr. Parker.
Never walk away. So it's not published. Unfortunately, to Mr. Geddes' point is that sometimes the priorities need to change due to storm events or maybe a water system failing. So as much as we have the plan, it is also very much a living document that will change year to year and even sometimes through the year because of different events.
Ms. Sheehy-Richard, you have 15 seconds.
Thank you.
Okay, so time has now elapsed for the PC questioning. We'll now move on to our second round. Each caucus will have 9 minutes, and we'll begin once again with the Liberal caucus. Mr. Clark.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I just, 9 minutes, correct?
9 minutes,
9 minutes.
10:18.
Perfect. So I just wanted to go back to the issue of kind of inventory of critical minerals, because I think there's actually an interesting historical example that gives us some direction on this. So back in 2008, Department of Energy commissioned what was called the Play Fairway analysis. $15 million, good chunk of change for sure. Back in the day, 2008, I guess. And the goal there was to stimulate, offshore activity on oil and gas in particular. So the data that came out of that analysis, my understanding, was made, open source. Anybody, Exxon, BP, whoever, take a look at it, see what you think, and come to us if you're interested. And as a result, we have over $2 billion of investment and activity of that $15 million that government invested. So is that something that could be done on critical minerals, for example? Would that be a strategy that would make sense to say, hey, look, here in Nova Scotia, we spent a few $1 million on really getting down to the nitty-gritty of where everything is, and we're going to make that available to the global industry to attract people to come here, because we know if you get, mines are among the most capital-intensive projects out there. So you get one up and running, you're going to obviously make your money back many times over. Is that something that the department would consider? Because again, we have a good recent example of that working very well here in the province.
Deputy Gatien?
Certainly, if there was a need for that information, I think that Play Fair idea has come up for a couple of things. So yeah, we're looking at anything that would help further that if it gets approved. So there's quite an inventory already in our geology with our geologists in terms of what exists, as well with the prospectors and the work that they've been doing. But if there was a need for further research and further study, we could certainly look at something like that.
Mr. Clark.
And I think the kind of the marketing side of that and the open source side of that is kind of the most interesting piece to me. So I think that's something we should be certainly thinking about. I kind of wanted to transition a little bit too to ask a couple of questions about forestry as well. So as we know, with the closure of Northern Pulp, that left a huge void in the market in terms of low-grade wood in particular. I'm just wondering what, if you could assess kind of what the status of this big question, I know, but if you kind of give us a general sense of where the forestry industry is at in Nova Scotia at the moment, and if that gap, particularly on the low-grade side, is being filled at all.
Deputy Gatien?
Maybe I'll kick it off and then punt it to Matt. I would say the forestry industry is strong. I think to be fair, the price of wood through COVID probably helped a bit. But we do know probably the number one problem. It's pretty tied to labor force as well as a home for low-grade fiber, for sure. And so we have a lot of, similar to our efforts in renewable energy, we have several irons in the fire trying to figure out what are different options. So what are some options in terms of developing, biofuel and new markets for our low-grade fiber. We continue that work. That piece is still troublesome. We're hoping there's some good opportunities ahead, but it's been a bit of an effort, and the high price of lumber, I think, has sort of carried them a little bit. That it hasn't hit them as hard as it's probably going to in the next few years. So we're trying to get ahead of that as much as possible, and make sure that it doesn't. But
Mr. Clark? Oh, sorry, Mr. Parker?
No, I was just going to say, I think that we're always looking for opportunities, and we're always trying to work with the sector to determine what the best use is for any of our fiber, including our low grade.
Mr. Clark.
Thank you, and I think the deputy's point is spot on. You don't want to be in a situation where a high price, it's a commodity. It goes up and down. You don't want to be in a situation where a high price is masking some fundamental weaknesses or gaps in the marketplace. I know I have believe it or not, actually, even though I represent quite a dense suburban riding, I do have a sawmill owner in my riding who I was speaking with the other day, amazing guy, and that was that was the issue in particular, was kind of, what do I do with the low grade? That's still, especially if you're starting out as a small operator, it's very difficult. So I appreciate the response there. And kind of connected to this, I'm always curious about, we talk about, the green economy, the green jobs of the future, which of course we all want to see, but there's also, anytime there's a transition of that scale, people will be hurt, right? People will lose jobs, things close, industries change dramatically. So that kind of just transition, to use that phrase, how does the department consider that? How do you plan for that in forestry, for example, or think about people who are working in coal plants in Nova Scotia right now, who probably justifiably have a lot of anxiety about what their future is going to look like. I was out today walking the dog this morning. The guy who's filling the oil tank at the neighbor's house, right? All of those positions are tenuous in some way. So how does the department see that? What is the department doing, if anything, to kind of prepare these industries for what could be, and we hope, to be honest, will be a pretty seismic transition over the next decade plus?
Deputy Gatien?
I think the coal plant example is a good one. I mean, I would say the forestry industry, we believe is going to be healthy and strong, and there might be some worker transition within it, of course. Like there are mills where, as they introduce technology, they're retraining their staff. That literally the job was to turn the log, now to train them to the next job up, right? Which is a great opportunity for people, to increase their skills. That doesn't mean we won't pay attention to it, but the just transition with the coal plants, I think, is probably the most timely example. So we work, in terms of our role, it would be more in the community piece of it. So we work as part of a team with our colleagues at Labour Skills and Immigration, because they would have the lead in terms of the worker transition. And so if you take a coal plant, for example, in Cape Breton, it's closing because I think this question actually came up, we would work with Labour Skills and Immigration and Nova Scotia Power, because it's their employees. And then our piece of it would be, okay, what do we do in terms of helping the community get ready? And we are meeting and talking about what are the opportunities, as LSI would work towards what are the opportunities to retrain these employees for new opportunities in the green sector, in the renewable sector, and helping them to understand, what are the jobs that are coming, that are available. We have a little group of deputies that meet fairly regularly in terms of the green hydrogen file, so economic development, myself, and environment, climate change, and our colleague at New Affairs. And we've included and invited our colleague from Labour Skills and Immigration, because it's important that you don't wait for it to hit us, right? So, my background's in workforce development, actually, and so a lot of times they would come to us, as you would know, and say, we need employees trained in this area of work. Well, if you come when you need them, it's almost too late. Not that you shouldn't, but if we can see it coming ahead, we know renewable energy is coming, we know green hydrogen's coming, we know these new jobs are developing. So how do we engage advanced education, labor skills and immigration to get ready for that, so that the just transition is smoother as well? So those really great question, though. Appreciate your question.
Order. The time for Liberal questioning has elapsed. We'll now move on to the NDP, and you have until 10:27. Mr. Burrell.
Thank you. I wonder if we could think a little bit more about Mabel Provincial Park, just because it's not an abstraction for people in Inverness County to be concerned about what might go ahead in the absence of their having been effectively consulted, because this whole kind of scenario was so much in the public in recent years around Owl's Head, and the legislation that we had proposed, which would have made it impossible to proceed without the kind of consultation that Owl's Head didn't have. That legislation hasn't been successful. So I think it is reasonable for people to say, well, what could happen here? We have all this ferment in the community. The government says, not ours. We don't have anything. We're out of the picture until we have something. So in that situation, I think it would be helpful if you could say as unequivocally as possible that there will be no decision taken on a proposal to convert Mabo Provincial Park under Cabot Links to a golf course without effective, complete, open, transparent consultation with the people of the communities affected. Is that a commitment that you'd be in a position to make today?
Deputy Gatien?
Absolutely, consultation has to happen. I think what might be helpful if Leslie, if you talked about what, like, the application comes in, what the process is, and Peter's process, because both their teams work pretty closely together when we get applications for Crown land use. So it might assure you a little bit.
Ms. Hickman?
Certainly. Thank you for the question. So any proposal to use Crown lands requires an application. So that way it's a formal, open, transparent process, and we can track that document through the system. As soon as that's received, it triggers a series of different types of reviews, due diligence, and obligations and research we have to take. So the first thing that would trigger would be what we call our Crown lands research. So that's, in this case, I mean, it's pretty clear that we own the land, but in other applications, it's not always clear. So we research it to see and confirm we own it, and then to identify any current uses or encumbrances that may impact the other new request. Simultaneously with that, we order what's called an integrated resource management report, and that is Mr. Geddes' team. And that's a group of experts within the department that review things such as biodiversity, geology, access, different types of forestry use, that sort of thing. So that's where the parks, in this case, because it's a provincial park, which comes under the Provincial Parks Act versus just Crown Lands Act. So that would trigger some reviews through Peter's team to look at those types of obligations and mitigations that may be required and so on. And then a critical part of any application receive is doing consultation with the Mi'kmaq Nova Scotia. It's an obligation we take very seriously. Anytime there's potential to impact, existing or potential rights, that's triggered. So that would be a key part early on in a process as well. And those are things that have to happen for any type of application. So when we're talking about a park, as I mentioned, it would involve working closely with Mr. Geddes' team, because that's the group that has the expertise over the Provincial Parks Act. Getting into sort of more the technical legal part, clearly these types of requests will result in various legal types of documentations. So if we got through the research, we got through the reviews, and it was something that's going to be contemplated, we would then get into an agreement. And that's where we'd set out all the terms and requirements of the different types of obligations the proponent or applicant's going to have to meet. So in the case of something like this, it would include an appraisal, survey work, and that's where we can build in the level of public consultation, because the Mi'kmaq consultation is just a given, and we express that always in our agreements, but that's something that we always have to follow. And then ultimately that sort of request would always end up with cabinet approval, ministerial approval, and so on. So as far as the consultation question, it's not atypical that we would have a spectrum and different levels of type of consultation. So without seeing the proposal, I can't commit to what that would exactly involve. And I don't know if Peter or Mr. Geddes wants to add anything from the IRM perspective to that type of review.
Mr. Geddes?
I don't think I have anything to add on that process. I think that covered it fairly well.
4 minutes, Deputy Gatien?
Yes. Peter's actually just reminded me that the Premier's been on record saying there'd be a consultation on this one, if they send their proposal in.
Yeah. Mr. Burrow?
Well, thank you about this. I want to ask also about biomass. You were saying in your opening remarks about the harvesting of the sustainable harvest of residuals directed towards biomass, but I don't think there would be very many contractors in the province who would say that over the last decade everything that they had shipped to biomass fell in that category. So this is a major and a legitimate concern. And in the original recommendations about renewable status and biomass and so on, it always came down to the life cycle analysis. That if that in order for biomass generated electricity to be regarded as renewable, this is an empirical question which is the answer to which is to be supplied by a life cycle analysis. But the department has never brought forward that kind of analysis. Does the department have plans to bring forward a life cycle analysis about biomass-generated electricity? And if there aren't plans, would it not be a good idea?
Deputy Gatien or Mr. Parker?
So, yeah, we agree that biomass needs to be sustainably harvested, and that, when we harvest wood, we need to take the best use out first, and that is sawables. And then anything left over after the sawable harvest, whether it's a sawmill residual or a residual in the forest, should again go to best use. So a biomass is, as we know, is not always the best use, but it is a good use when there is no other uses. So we are actively making sure, or we're actively working on making sure that the biomass is sustainably procured. And in terms of the life cycle analysis, I'll have to take that back to my team and see what work we've done on that, and if we've done any work or not on that.
Mr. Burrell, 1 minute.
Well, I do think it is a very important consideration because, of course, the public in general don't have the expertise to answer this empirical question, is this renewable or not? But experts say the answer to that question has to do with the life cycle analysis. Well, I would think that it would then fall to the department's responsibility both to have the answer to that question, what is the result of the life cycle analysis, and to make the methodology public. So if that were a commitment that the department could make, we will investigate having the life cycle analysis that's been recommended all through these years, and that that it will be made public. I think that'd be very important.
Deputy Gatien?
We'll certainly take it back and find out what's been done and why or why not, and certainly commit to that. Absolutely.
Mr. Burrell, 4 seconds.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. All right, and now we'll go over to the PC Caucus. Mr. Taggart, in 9 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And my first question is kind of out there, but I'm just curious. We talked a little bit about mine site remediation and the costs, and then Deputy Gatien spoke about tailings and remining tailings. Is there any potential for any of these, what we might call contaminated sites, to combine the work, to redo the tailings and still take, is there any potential there at all?
Mr. Geddes?
Yeah, certainly as part of, there's a lot of work going on around the whole mine site remediation piece involving multiple departments. We've got a cross-departmental committee that works on these issues. One of the advantages of having the Geoscience and Mines group with our Crown Lands group in the department is that we've been able to kind of team up on some of these types of solutions. So yes, we've been talking about some of those options. It will really come down to sort of the right site, the right timing, the right economics, and all those kinds of things. But we are doing some work now to kind of consider what a pilot site might be at this point in time. We do not have a site in mind yet.
Mr. Taggart?
Thank you. It just almost seems too good to be true that you could clean something up and get good out of it. But anyway, so I want to go to, excuse me, yes, promoting the forest sector innovation and transformation is listed in the 22-23 business plan as a key initiative. Can you discuss any specific progress that we made on that initiative?
Mr. Parker?
So we work with a variety of stakeholders on that. We've worked with the folks at the Innovation Hub to look at ways to use low-grade fiber. The Forest Innovation Trust has provided funding to do an economic task force to, again, look at ways to make the the sector more viable and more lost for words here. More sustainable in the long term, to again being a commodity-based industry, to kind of make it go through the ups and downs, and again add more value to the economics of Nova Scotia.
Mr. Taggart?
Thank you. And so what can you tell us about the recovery plans for species at risk, and what's the status of this, you know, and what partners might you be working with?
Mr. Parker?
Yeah, so we're actively working on that. Folks remember we had a judicial review a few years ago. We've implemented all six requirements under that judicial review, and we continue to work on our species at risk files. So we still have some outstanding, but those ones are more difficult or more challenging ones where we have a lack of scientific information to help us. An example would be an insect where the last recorded occurrence was 20 years ago. So to get the scientific information to be able to help us develop that plan is a little bit challenging. But also, we also work very closely with our federal colleagues with COSEWIC and developing recovery plans for them.
Deputy Gatien, do you want? Okay. So, Mr. Taggart.
Thanks, Chair. So last October, it was announced that your department would invest $4.6 million to help private woodlot owners clean up trees that were blown down, leaning or weakened or whatever during Fiona. Wonder if we could have a little bit of a progress report on that, please.
Mr. Parker.
Yeah, thanks. So we've partnered with the Association of Sustainable Forestry to help us deliver that program. So to date, we've had over 300 landowners who have self-identified with the association that have had identified with blown down damage. And right now, they've actually paid out 7 claims to landowners, and we have over 60 parcels of private land underway in that program. So, you know, we were able to get that money out the door quick and get some cleanup happening on private land.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Over to Mr. Smith. You have just over 4 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not sure if I'll fill all the 4 minutes or not, but I've got one that I want to address quickly just because my colleague from Halifax, Shabukta, brought it up. That is Owl's Head. So clearly on the Eastern Shore, a lot of attention throughout the campaign period. I just want to make it clear and get some comments from the department on the situation with Owl's Head is nothing like the situation with West Mabou. I wonder if you can comment on that, Deputy.
Deputy Gatien.
Yeah, I think I agree. It wasn't actually even a designated park, Owl's Head either, right? So it was proposed. This is a park in Mabou. I don't know if you want to add anything further, you guys.
Mr. Geddes.
Well, there's a lot of history there, to lay out. But I mean, I think one distinction with this scenario, as the deputy said, is that Owl's Head was on a list of sites for potential future protection as a park. Had never formally received that designation. It wasn't a Parks and Protected Areas plan. Mabou is a working park. It's an established park that is designated and operational. So, I think the other distinction is that, Owl's Head was basically undeveloped land. There'd never been any development activity occur there before. Where in this case with West Mabou, there's actually park assets and park resources located there.
Mr. Smith.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that clarity. You referenced the Parks and Protected Areas plan. That's the 2013 plan that came out. I believe there are 782 areas identified on that. I'm wondering if you can speak to what the plan is for those 782 potentially protected parks and areas as we move forward.
Mr. Geddes?
I'm not sure that's the exact right number, and so within the plan there are 3 different types of sites that we talk about. One is wilderness areas, one is nature reserves. Those two are under the mandate of the Minister of Environment and Climate Change. In fact, once they're designated, they're no longer Crown land. If they came from Crown land, they would be administered by that department. And then we've got the park sites. On the park site side, the ones that fall to us, we've got about 89 parks that are left in that plan that have yet to be designated. There are quite a few wilderness areas and nature reserves that also do have to be done throughout the plan. So we will continue to work on that. I think our minister's been pretty clear about the prime job one is to try to get that Parks and Protected Areas plan wrapped up, which gets us to around 14%. Once that's done, it will actually, even before that's done, because this year we have to start putting together a plan on how we would go from that 14% on to the 20% commitment. Big challenge. We've got only 25% of the province is Crown land. It's going to be a big challenge to work through. But this year we'll be working on that sort of plan to get to 20 by sort of focusing on what are the types of land we want to look for, what are the criteria, what type of landscapes we want to have representing those protected areas. So at the end of the year we should have some type of strategy on how we're going to choose the sites to get us to the next phase of 20% by 2030.
Mr. Smith, you have 40 seconds left.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I guess I'll just wrap up by saying thanks everyone for being here today. I always like to, when Natural Resources is a witness, and we get to talk a little bit because it gives me the opportunity to highlight all of the wonderful natural resources that we have on the Eastern Shore, the 5 great beaches that are in the top 10 in the province, the parks and the trails that we have. So thank you. Hopefully we get some more infrastructure dollars to increase the parking and increase the tourism that it brings to the Eastern Shore. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now, Deputy Gatien, do you have any closing remarks?
Just a sincere thank you for your interest in the topic. You know, we're very proud of the work the department does. It's in many cases we're the frontline client-facing. You know, we're in the regions, in the rural communities, and working with our fellow Nova Scotians and doing some really great and important work. So I really appreciate your interest and your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our witnesses are free to go out into the world, and we will continue on with committee business right now. Our first item of committee business is a motion that came to the floor in a previous meeting, and MLA McGuire has requested that it be delayed until he is actually here to deal with it. So with the committees, Mr. McDonald?
Thank you, Madam Chair, because I was going to say, out of respect for the member, we should defer it until he's here. So I'm glad he asked that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, then we move on to pre-hearing briefings. So this item is carried forward from the December 14th meeting because a decision wasn't reached on how the committee would like to proceed in relation to preparation for the new topics it selected. So to prepare the committee for meetings as part of the new procedure related to topic selection, some folks expected hearing briefings to discuss key areas of focus would be held with the the Auditor General's office the week before witnesses appear on a topic. Others were surprised by that. So, so what this means, in essence, is that a meeting date would be taken up by an in-camera pre-hearing briefing. So we should, I think, discuss that. This is the way that we deal with Auditor General reports. We have a meeting the week before, it's in camera. It has not been how we have dealt with topics in the past. So I wanted to put that out to the committee for some discussion about how it needs to be done. We had some very brief discussion last time. Mr. Young, I think you're indicating you'd like to speak.
I think we have one foot in the pool and the other foot out. You know, with the Auditor General, with the way that we had intended to pilot this, the topic selection, I think input from the Auditor General would be critical when we're talking about accountability reports. I'd like to see this in the same manner as other Auditor General reports where we have her in camera, we can talk collaboratively prior to the actual meeting. So I'd like to see us do the the in-camera briefing prior to the topic.
MLA LeBlanc.
Thanks. I just will say that in the past, and I don't remember how far in the past, but certainly I was on the committee, that there were there was a time when there would be a briefing in advance of the meeting. So it wouldn't be the meeting. So what I'm suggesting, or we're putting on the table at least, is that say we have a meeting next week for, you know, like say today's meeting. The week before, before whatever meeting was scheduled the week before, at 8:30 we would have an in-camera briefing about the topic that's coming up the following week. So that gives us a chance to get some information from the Auditor General, and then our researchers are there, and then we can sort of go back and prepare for the meeting that's the week before. So then that would be immediately precede a meeting of a different topic, but I think we can probably get our heads around that, you know, changing track. So I just want to put that on the table, because I don't remember what it was for, but we used to have half an hour in-camera meetings with the Auditor General in advance of a regular 9 o'clock meeting.
I actually think it was, and again, I was not a member of the committee, so let me be clear, but my recollection is that it would be a half-hour meeting on the topic that we were going into.
Oh, yeah, it was.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, so that was the past practice, and as I did indicate in the last, when we dealt with it very, very quickly last time, there is nothing that prevents us from doing a virtual meeting beforehand in camera, rather than taking up another meeting in camera, not in public. Mr. Clark.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And obviously, I'm not a permanent member of the committee, so I will say this with respect. But I agree with what MLA LeBlanc had to say. There's obviously a limited number of days and a limited number of topics to have PAC committee meetings, and I think it's a very important committee for all members. So I think what the member has proposed makes sense. I mean, to lose an entire meeting seems excessive to me. So if the solution, I think a middle ground solution, would be to have, again, whether it's 15 minutes, half an hour, 45 minutes, I don't know, something like that prior to a regularly scheduled meeting, so that we're not losing a significant number of potential meeting dates, right? Because there are limited opportunities to hear from these folks, and I think we should have as many of them as we can for all members. Thank you.
MLA LeBlanc.
Yeah, thanks. That being said, I was just going to, oh my God, I lost my train of thought. But one of the things I was going to say is I think like an online meeting would be great. And that way we don't have to, you know, in terms of, I can see that people from outside the city center would be like, well, getting here at 8:30, that's tricky, you know, so that would prevent that, an online meeting at a different time. But what I was going to say was, the difference is between the accountability reports and the Auditor General's reports. And, you know, like for Auditor General reports, the Auditor General's office has done a significant pile of work that then they want to come and explain to us and sort of, you know, go take us through their extensive report. Whereas the accountability reports are done, you know, yearly by the department. There's less meat and potatoes to them. And so, you know, perhaps we don't need a full 2 hours with the Auditor General to go through them.
Mr. Young.
You know, going back to, this is a pilot. This is something that we're trying. This is not anything that's set in stone. I think the intent from the CAAF, I think the intent from the Auditor General was to really go through some of these reports. I don't think a half hour is necessarily going to cut it. I would like to see us do the in-camera. Perhaps the Auditor General would like to speak on what the intent was, but there's valuable information that certainly the AG could provide us with, and I don't see a half hour cutting it. So it's not set in stone. This isn't something that we're going to do forever, but just during this trial period of working collaboratively, I really feel that we should be doing the in-camera the week before the topic comes out. I understand that there's only so many meeting dates and there's only so many times that we could actually get together, but really, you know, are we meeting for the sake of meeting, or are we meeting for actual value and questioning and working together? So again, rather than, you know, a half hour before, 15 minutes before or whatnot, let's jump into this. Let's take a approach to work collaboratively. It's only through this test period, this pilot period. It's not forever. And I think we should take that approach.
Mr. Smith?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'll echo some of the comments from my colleague, but I will begin by saying that as a newish member of this committee, only been here for a few months, I have found it extremely valuable to the entire process to get that extra time dedicated to learning about the topic prior to going into the quote-unquote regular meeting. So I'm a huge supporter of having the additional meeting to learn more about the topic, and to Mr. Clark's point that we only have a limited number of Wednesdays to meet and address topics. I think that the value that we're getting out of the actual meeting as a result of having the meeting the week before is superior. It adds more value by having a little bit extra time to talk and learn about the topic at hand. So I'd love to keep it the way it is, and if that only turns out to be until the end of this pilot project, then so be it, but I see the value in it. Thank you.
MLA LeBlanc?
Listen, I didn't know we were in a pilot project because we haven't had a motion to move the pilot project. But in the spirit of collaborative working together, of working collaboratively together, I would say, sure, fine. Let's, we'll do it that way. Or I'm happy to support for the 8-month period. But like, it is bitterly ironic that we're saying, oh, well, it'll be for an 8-month period, and then we don't actually have a designated 8-month period. So it's hard to support it when ultimately right now, the PC caucus has the majority vote. So like, we'll do what you need to do because you have the majority vote. But also perhaps the motion, if you're going to put a motion on the floor about this, it should designate an end time for like trying this out, because right now we have no way to know, like right now you rule the roost, right? We know this. So if we are working collaboratively, then we need to work collaboratively, and we need to know that it's consensus and blah, 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 all the things we've talked about. So, you can't have it both ways. I mean, you can have it both ways because you're in charge, but it would be better if you didn't have it both ways.
Mr. Taggart, you wanted to say something?
I do. I just think that I want to go with the meeting a week in advance. I think that during this trial, I don't know how we frame it now, but we're going to get the topics from the Auditor General, and I have to think that she'll select the topics that are of significant importance. And I want to be fully briefed on them. I actually, I shouldn't say need, but, I kind of like to ruminate on things a little bit, I like to have the knowledge in advance and be able to kind of think it through over a week and ask a few questions and stuff like that. I like that. And I'd like to do that, like I'm newish like Mr. Smith is, but that's where I'd like to be. And then when we come back to normal or wherever we're going, then we do it. That's my thoughts on it. Thank you.
So I will say that there is a middle way down the road here, which is that we do have a meeting in advance so you can ruminate, that it's online so you don't have to come in, right? So that way we get the information from the Auditor General, but we're not giving up a meeting. So I'm just going to put that out there. Again, we're like half pregnant right now, right? Because we're in this pilot project that's never had a motion moved on it, and it's never been voted on, right? And yet we're dealing with it as if it's actually happened, and it has not, right? So I will just put that out there. Ms. LeBlanc.
Well, I just wanted to say, so there are 52 weeks in a year. Currently, we don't meet 52 times a year. Mm-hmm. So there's 6 topics, I believe, from the auditor of these types of reports, right? So 6 plus 6 is 12. So if we have an extra 6 meetings, instead of like replacing other things with these meetings, I think that would be also a way to collaborate. So we add 6 meetings to the schedule. Again, they're just, listen, all of us have Wednesday from 9 to 11 blocked off in our calendar. So if we add 6 meetings to the schedule, that to me makes sense. If we're going to take away other meetings for these, it makes less sense. So we have room in the schedule. We don't meet every single Wednesday. So I would say let's adjust the schedule to make that work. But I think that, you know, again, in the spirit of collaboration, in the spirit of getting briefed and having all the information we need as a committee to ask the right questions, I think it's all important. But it means that we meet more instead of we meet differently. And I hope that you look confused by what I'm saying.
Mr. Young.
I am confused on what you're saying here. Can you explain that again? Like, yeah.
Ms. LeBlanc.
Yeah, my concern is that by taking 6 meetings and making them briefings with the Auditor General, that we lose other meeting times. Like we lose times to do the ones that we proposed or whatever, right? Because remember that there's also those meetings on the docket, things like topics that we are all interested in. Now, I understand that the Auditor General is proposing things based on our conversations with her. What I'm saying is that we don't switch out an existing spot for one of these meetings, a briefing meeting, but we add meetings. So if we have an Auditor General's report, or if we have so for instance, today's topic, we could have met last week for 2 hours with the Auditor General in preparation for today's topic. That makes sense. That was an empty spot. But if it wasn't an empty spot, say we put that meeting there and then we bump everything up. And I know that the clerk has already scheduled some meetings, so that might be tricky in some cases. But going forward, all I am saying is that we don't replace existing meeting times, but we add 6 new slots in to the schedule. So that might mean we sit into June. That might mean we sit into July, God forbid. But we get those 6 meetings in. Or we meet every Wednesday, every month, or every week until July, or whatever it is.
Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think the MLA answered the question I was going to ask. So what you're saying is you want us to meet over Christmas and summer. It's because those are the only times we actually don't. We don't meet for March break. We don't, unless I miss the schedule, the only times, unless there's nothing scheduled, the only thing, and the clerk can correct me, the only times that they do not schedule us is the Christmas break, March break, and for summer. And I will obviously defer to the chair to get clarification for that.
Yeah, sometimes we have meetings or we have dates where we don't have witnesses that are available. So there are open meetings. There's not a lot of them. I can say that.
Okay, that was just my point, because that's what I realized that so.
Sorry, Mr. McDonald. Sorry,
Oh.
no, my fault, Mr. McDonald.
I shouldn't have kept talking until it was there. So, if that's what you're talking about, I mean, that also does not just affect us. And I mean, we had this conversation before. The provincial staff schedule their vacations when committees don't meet. So for me, if you're talking about going from no summer break from the not meeting in the summer, that we're going to meet all through the summer, that conversation is going to take over longer than this meeting, is my opinion. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Ms. LeBlanc.
There are 52 weeks of the year. I don't see how the math works out. If we add 6 meetings to what we're already doing, it will not take the full 2 months of summer break, if you consider summer break to be July and August, and it will not take the full, say, 3 weeks of the holiday season, because that is 8 plus 3 is 12, and there's only 6 meetings. So also, people are free to miss a meeting. We have a substitute today. We often have substitutes. It's possible. I am saying it is not fair to take away, to use this briefing period to limit topics that we want to bring forward to this committee. It's nice to have some wiggle room. So I'm saying this is not a, I don't think this is a rocket science decision. We all agree that it's good to have briefings from the Auditor General. We all agree it's good to be prepared. We all agree that it's good that we are on the same page when it comes to asking questions. That's the point. That's the whole point of working better. So all I'm saying is, let us work hard to slot those meetings in, and you know, understanding that people like to have a summer vacation, and understanding that people need to take a break every once in a while, or have another commitment, that we would get this done. 6 meetings, we can do it. Come on, kids.
I will just say, that's why I actually think the virtual option is better, because it's clear that we have people who don't want to meet during the summer and at Christmas time, and I respect that. And that's why taking a meeting time on the day before or the week before with the AG virtually is an option that makes sort of everybody happy. So if we're continuing to be half pregnant, we at least have an option here. Mr. Young.
We meet 40 times a year. We meet more than any other public accounts committee in the country and perhaps beyond. And I think in the spirit of the Auditor General and the CAAF, the CCPAC, in those meetings that we had, I'd like to put a motion on the floor that I move that the Public Accounts Committee hold in-camera briefings the week before at the usual scheduled committee time for the purpose of discussing topics put forward by the Auditor General. And just to clarify, this is just for the current topic selection that we have with accountability reports to go through it.
All right, so we have a motion on the floor. Mr. Clark?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just asked for a recorded vote on this motion. Thank you.
Okay. Any further discussion on this? So I'll ask the clerk to do the recorded vote.
Miss Sheehy Richard,
Yes.
Mr. McDonald,
Yes.
Mr. Taggart,
Yes.
Mr. Young,
Yes.
Miss LeBlanc,
No.
Mr. Burrell,
No.
Mr. Clark,
No.
Mr. Smith,
Yes.
and Madam Chair.
No.
The motion is
The motion is carried. Okay, so we will move on to the endorsement of Auditor General Recommendations 2022 Financial Report. The committee's practice is to endorse the recommendations made by the Auditor General that have been accepted by departments. Ms. LeBlanc moved the standard motion to endorse the recommendation, which was left on the floor because we ran out of time. So the motion was that the Public Accounts Committee formally accept and endorse recommendations contained in the 2022 financial report of the Auditor General that have been accepted by the audited department or agencies, and ask that those departments and agencies commit to and take responsibility for full and timely implementation of the recommendations accepted by those departments and agencies. So I open the floor for discussion. Mr. Taggart.
Thank you. I would love to hear the. I would love to hear the motion, but if we're because I was the one. What's that? It's
I
here.
just read.
Yeah,
I
it's in
just
your-
read it.
Okay, sorry. Because if I spoke out about this in the last meeting, and I misunderstood it because I didn't realize that it said that that we only those that were accepted by the departments. I think I'm satisfied with that. I apologize, I didn't have this in front of me. I thought you did. So
I will just say that the response from the department was not a typical one, because usually they say, you know, we're accepting all of these except for maybe this one, and they say why. It was sort of, the response from the department was a bit of a straddle, where they said they would do it if they were told to by the government. So it was a little different. It's a bit of a wrinkle. I don't even know what we do with that, because to me it's half a no. Again, it's half pregnant again. But I'm open to hearing other points. Mr. McDonald, we have a minute and a half.
I will be very quick, Madam Chair.
Yeah.
And that is why I would have preferred, as I've said to this, just having that emailed out 5 minutes before for us to look at it. We possibly could have had this dealt with last month, so that's why it's different if it's I move, we change something to green, but when you've got a long one, it would be nice to have it. So that's why it's one of my pet peeves, as you know, as the chair.
Yeah.
And I'll stop talking so we can vote on it. Thank you.
Okay. Any further discussion?
So we're voting on
We're voting on the motion. All those in... Yep. Ms. Dudley? Sure.
Should we?
She already called it to go ahead. She already called it to go
Yeah,
ahead.
yeah.
Yeah, just, you requested it.
Ms. Sheehy Richard?
Yes.
Mr. McDonald?
Yes.
Mr. Taggart?
Yes.
Mr. Young?
Yes.
Ms. LeBlanc?
Yes.
Mr. Burrell?
Yes?
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
And Mr. Smith? Yes. And Madam Chair?
Yes.
Unanimous.
Well, it's nice to have a unanimous vote on the record, folks.
All right, so we do have correspondence, which we probably can't deal with in this. It'll be pretty brief, but we have 10 seconds. So I will just say, if those motions were contained in what was sent out, so they were previously received by people, as was the correspondence, right? So that did come out. So we do all have copies of that, and now we're at 11 o'clock. So we'll deal with correspondence next week, okay? And our next meeting day is January 18th, 2023, in camera with the Office of the Auditor General regarding Metropolitan Regional Housing Authority's examination of the service contract awards. And time having elapsed, the meeting is adjourned.